Hello, and welcome to Wisdom Protective's Anti-Harassment Training. I'm Michelle Goldstein, Wisdom's General Counsel and HR Director.
And I'm Michelle Ochoa, Wisdom's HR Manager and newest member of the HR team.
We put together this training at our headquarters in Westbury, New York, and had some fun pulling it together. There are some laughable moments, and you may hear some familiar voices. However, please know we are serious about preventing sexual harassment in our workplace. Our training is broken into two sections. The first is recognizing harassment. In this training, we will define sexual harassment, describe the two types, and share some examples to help you identify. Spoiler alert, the pictures on your screen might qualify. We will describe other protected categories so that you can recognize other types of harassment as well. The second part of our training will be focused on preventing harassment. We'll describe Wisdom's policies and steps for filing a complaint of harassment. We will also review the very important role bystanders can play in preventing harassment and how to intervene if you are a bystander or are asked by a bystander to intervene. So let's start with the basics. What is sexual harassment? Well, the definition is right up here on the screen. Sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct directed at an individual because of their sex or conduct of a sexual nature, when the purpose or result of the conduct unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment, even if the reporting individual is not the intended target of the conduct, or where submission to or rejection of the conduct is made a term or condition of employment, either explicitly or implicitly, or used as the basis for employment decisions. Sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination. Breaking down this definition, sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct. How does a person know that their conduct is unwelcome? Well, sometimes it's obvious, but often a person needs to be told. Now, some people feel comfortable being direct. If that's you, that's great. You should simply tell the harasser, "Stop, I don't appreciate your comment," or "Seriously, cut it out," or if you need to, keep your hands to yourself. However, many people are not comfortable speaking up. That's okay too. You don't have to put up with harassment because you're not a confrontational person. Simply tell a manager or HR and we will put the person on notice. We're happy to do so. Next part of the definition. Conduct must either be directed at a person because of their sex or be of a sexual nature. So let's talk about the first part. Conduct that is directed at a person because of their sex does not have to have a sexual component to it. For example, if you're working at a post where nearly all security officers are male and only the females on duty are the butt of all the jokes, that could be sexual harassment. Now let's talk about conduct of a sexual nature. What does that mean? The conduct can be overtly sexual, mentioning sex, or more subtle. Harassing conduct takes many forms: words, written or verbal, nonverbal, visual, physical. We'll show you some examples, starting with the overly familiar email you see on the screen that suggests that somebody has a more than professional interest in dear Penelope. What follows are some verbal examples.
Hey, Hunk Alicious, get that fine booty over here. You know what I mean. What? You mean I'm not woman enough for you? Believe me, I have handled big men like you. But let me ask you a question. What kind of woman do you even like?
That woman hit all the bullets. Hunkalicious, the catcall, the discussion of sex. Other examples of verbal or written harassment might include bullying, name-calling, or spreading rumors about someone if they are of a sexual nature or directed at a person because of their sex. Here's another verbal example of harassing conduct.
So you're telling me you won't go out with me because you're a lesbian? What does that even mean? I see a nice looking woman who cares about how she looks in a uniform. Let me take you out. I think if you go out with a real man, you might change your mind about being a lesbian.
No thanks.
Alright, so who are you going out with? You going with Joanna from the third floor? You getting kissy with her? I just want to understand how it is.
Now, doesn't that make you feel uncomfortable? Harassing conduct can be nonverbal. The actions may be of a sexual nature, like the man in the photo, or directed at a person because of their sex, like following a person or buying them personal gifts. Harassing conduct can be visual. The classic example is the pinup calendars that used to hang around the office. These days, it's more likely to be a sext, a sexy picture or video sent over text. Harassing conduct can be physical. Assault, of course, is at the most extreme end of the spectrum. Blocking someone from walking, perhaps so they have to brush up against you. Touching someone. I want to remind you that independent of our EEO policies, Wisdom Protective has a strict hands-off policy. No one should be touching anyone except to provide first aid or similar assistance, or in self-defense or the defense of others. There can be plenty of cues when you've crossed the boundary of making someone feel uncomfortable. In this next funny video, you'll see a young, attractive woman walking around a college campus, deliberately getting too close while asking directions. Pay attention to the body language and statements.
Hey, sorry, do you know where the gym is?
The gym?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry. Yeah, the gym.
so it's like, just go down Palma for a while.
Okay.
You'll be able to reach it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No worries.
Yeah. Have a good day. Hey, excuse me. I'm a little bit lost. Can you lead me in the direction of Hacienda?
Hacienda?
Yeah.
Trying to go to the dorm, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. I go to NAU and be real.
Oh, okay. So you don't know the
Yeah.
directions?
Yeah,
Okay.
you gotta be close, bro.
Oh, what? Sorry.
I have no idea, honestly.
Okay.
I would get a little bit too close.
Oh,
here.
sorry.
No,
Sorry.
you're good.
It just, okay. Thanks. Sorry, do you guys know where Hacienda
Yeah,
is?
so you see Palm
You want
Palm
to
Walk?
Yeah, which is like just like straight over there, right?
Yeah, so you go down Palm Walk,
Okay.
all the way down to SSC.
Okay.
You take a left, and if
Okay.
you follow down, there's like a little traffic light. You go past that, Hacienda's right around
Okay.
there.
Awesome. Thank you.
problem.
Appreciate it. Sorry, I'm a little lost. Do you guys know where the MU is?
The MU is, I think,
Sorry.
what?
Is it?
Yeah, it's just down the Palm Walk.
Okay. Thank you. I was just.
I want to take a moment and talk about these terms. Sexual orientation describes who you are attracted to. Homosexual people are attracted to people of the same sex. Gender identity is whether you identify as a man, woman, or non-binary. It may or may not coincide with your biological sex, and now with modern medicine may change during a person's lifetime. Gender expression is adopting an appearance that does or does not coincide with a person's apparent gender identity. If your conduct, whether it's verbal, written, physical, or nonverbal, is unwelcome and focused on any person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, this is sexual harassment. If your conduct is non-sexual in nature, but directed at a person because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, this too is sexual harassment. Many people are raised with little exposure to, or perhaps negative views about individuals with non-traditional sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. You may have questions or wish to share your opinions. Do not do it. You may assume that the following examples are unwelcome. Stating or implying that someone is a particular sexual orientation or transgender with a negative implication. Making jokes about someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Asking about sexual practices. asking questions about a transgender person's transition, criticizing a person's gender non-conforming clothing or cosmetic choices or conforming choices, and lastly, using derogatory slang referencing a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Let's recap what we know about sexual harassment so far. Sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, whether verbal, written, physical, visual, or nonverbal. Sexual harassment is also unwelcome conduct, whether or not of a sexual nature, that is directed at an individual because of their sex, including non-traditional expressions of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. There are two types of sexual harassment. Quid pro quo, which is a Latin phrase that means this for that, a bargain, if you will. It involves a person in power demanding sexual favors or submitting to unwelcome sexual conduct as a condition of getting or keeping a job benefit. The other is hostile environment. That's where the conduct interferes with the ability to work or is so objectionable that individuals are uncomfortable working in the environment. Here is a recent example from our industry. Two female school security officers working in a high school in Montclair, New Jersey, brought a lawsuit alleging that their male coworkers, including supervisors, kept a running commentary on the attractiveness of female students, visitors, and school employees. An example: when a student's mother, who the men considered attractive, would visit the school, the men would make comments such as, "Add that one to our books," and "Look at her body." Imagine coming to work and knowing that your coworkers may be openly talking about your body and whether you belong in their book. It is inappropriate and unprofessional. Needless to say, Montclair is now facing a hostile environment sexual harassment lawsuit. We have so far been talking about sexual harassment. However, there are other legally protected categories like the ones you see on the screen. These categories are protected because they are parts of us that make us who we are. We all fall into a protected category. We all have a sex, a race, and ethnicity. Imagine being harassed just for being yourself. It's stressful. It's unfair. Studies show that it's also stressful to work in an environment where harassment is tolerated, even if you're not the target. We don't want that at Wisdom. You might be asking yourself, why do we do this training annually? Perhaps it's like a fire drill, where the lessons are more likely to stick with you in the heat of the moment, if you've gone over the steps in advance. Hopefully, you'll remember what to do if you witness or experience unlawful harassment. Look, sexual harassment in the workplace still happens. Consider this news report involving a case from our industry. We've reviewed the types of harassment, so now let's test your knowledge by making a note of the types of harassments alleged.
Unbelievable stories of sexual harassment in the workplace continue to emerge on social media. Now a security guard at one of our nation's busiest airports is speaking out. Have a look.
A disturbing new lawsuit has landed on one of America's largest security companies, Allied University. LaDonna Powell, who worked as an Allied security guard at JFK Airport, claims she suffered harrowing torment during a 4-year span. The distressed employee alleges she was presented with a choice: have sex with male supervisors and get ahead, or refuse and be relentlessly harassed. Powell, who is black, goes on to say she was often called the N-word by white supervisors and denied meal and bathroom breaks on multiple occasions.
Okay, we've we've talked about two types of harassment so far, quid pro quo and hostile environment. In the first category, I hear two allegations of sexual harassment that qualify as quid pro quo. Have sex and get ahead, and have sex or you won't get a meal or bathroom break. In both cases, the sexual favors are in exchange for a workplace benefit, or in the case of the breaks, a workplace right. In the hostile environment category, I hear name calling, the N-word. Racial harassment is a form of race discrimination, and of course, the whole environment described as hostile, likely even for those who were not targeted by the harassers. If it is not yet clear, let me say this explicitly. Wisdom Protective is an Equal Employment Opportunity, or EEO, employer. Our policies prohibit unlawful harassment or other discrimination based on sex or any other legally protected category. The Wisdom Protective policy applies to harassment by you or against you, by a coworker, client, or others you may encounter while working with us, like a delivery person or a visitor to your site. No one who works at Wisdom Protective should feel like they have to tolerate sexual or other unlawful harassment to work here.
So far, we've been talking about our EEO policies. However, Wisdom Protective has other policies that address our expectations for on-the-job conduct. We've previously discussed our hands-off policy. We also want to reference our standards of business conduct, which can be found in the employee handbook and is excerpted on the screen. Notice, we expect your conduct to be professional and respectful. Harassing conduct is not. We expect communications to be primarily business-focused and free of obscene or threatening language. Harassing communication often does not meet this standard. Harassing conduct is not just a violation of our EEO policies, it does not meet our standards of business conduct. Let's talk about what happens if you didn't intend to harass someone, but you say or do something that turns out to be unwelcome. Does intent matter? The answer is that while intent is part of the story, it is not determinative. Remember the school security officer case out of Montclair, New Jersey. There, a bunch of guys maybe didn't intend for their coworkers to overhear them rape the women in their orbit, but the women did hear it, and the women now have a credible complaint of hostile environment. I want to share another case from our industry called Whitley versus Sectec. This case involves a security company named Sectec that's out of Virginia. Here's the scenario. Two colleagues, Whitley, a man, and Silver, a woman, are friendly. Buy presents for each other's kids friendly. Whitley is the lead tour supervisor, a site supervisor like many of our Wisdom sites have. One day, Whitley texts his wife a picture of a female trainer in a bikini to motivate her to get in shape for their upcoming cruise. Silver, standing next to him, notices and tells Whitley she could use some motivation too. She asks Whitley to send her the photo, which he does. According to Whitley, Silver gets the photo and expresses surprise and delight. Several months later, Sectec adopts a new policy against idle chatter during work hours. Claiming he has no choice, Whitley writes up Silver, and Silver serves a one-day suspension for violating this policy. So much for friends, right? Silver plots her revenge. A few months later, Silver shows the bikini picture to HR and claims she was sexually harassed by Whitley. The company brings in an investigator who does not find that the sexual harassment occurred because of the text. That's because the sending of the photo was not unwelcome. But while they are doing the investigation, Sectec finds other things about Whitley and decide that overall, sending the picture was just bad judgment, and they fire him. Whitley sues Sectec saying, "I'm being fired because I'm a man," which is how we know about this story. What a mess. We can't help but notice that if these security officers followed the Wisdom standards of business conduct and kept their interactions professional, the parties may have all been spared this situation.
Michelle, let me ask you some questions. First, what if the parties are or were in a consensual relationship?
Well, Michelle, if you are a supervisor, you should not be supervising someone with whom you have a relationship. Relationship dynamics can change quickly. That's what the Whitley case shows us. If you're in one of these relationships, please contact HR so we can adjust the reporting lines.
And what if the parties are not attracted to each other?
Remember, there doesn't have to be a sexual attraction for there to be sexual harassment. If conduct is directed to someone because of their sex, it can still be sexual harassment.
What if the harassment happens after hours, through a text, email, phone call, maybe a meetup at a bar?
If what happens off hours affects or relates to the workplace, the policy applies.
What if the harasser is not employed by Wisdom Protective?
Our policy still applies. If the delivery person or a parent of the school you're posted at is harassing you, you don't have to put up with that. Make a complaint. How bad does the conduct have to be before it rises to the level of sexual harassment? Or another way to ask this is, can a single act constitute sexual harassment? Some statutes require the conduct complained about to be either severe or pervasive. However, this standard has been weakened. In a racial harassment case, New Jersey ruled that a single act, a racial epithet, met the standard. New York has eliminated the standard altogether. It is generally accepted that asking your coworker for a date one time will generally not constitute sexual harassment. This is what I call the one date rule. However, consider the text stream on the screen between a persistent employee and a colleague who wants to keep things professional. Persistent employee has apparently asked for a date more than once and is not taking no for an answer. Why do you not like me again? You won't even let me buy you a drink. The professional employee is saying, I am only interested in a professional relationship. The persistent employee responds, so why only a professional relationship? Is this conduct severe or pervasive? It's difficult to know for sure, but each single act adds up. Let's pause and review some key takeaways we've discussed regarding how our EEO policies interact with our other policies. Be mindful of Wisdom's hands-off policy. In short, keep your hands to yourself. Also be mindful of Wisdom's standards of business conduct, requiring employees to be professional and respectful in the performance of their duties. Any interactions of a sexual nature are risky, regardless of your intention. The same applies to interactions that reference any of the other protected categories. How do you know what's okay? There's a poem and book out there called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, the idea of which is that basic civility, playing fair, sharing kindness, are skills taught in kindergarten. So, one way to get a perspective is to ask yourself, would your kindergarten teacher be proud to learn of your behavior? How about your parents or your children? If not, then it's probably not okay for the workplace. So now we've come to the second part of this training, preventing harassment. What should you do if you feel you're being harassed? First, remain professional, as much as possible. Yes, the person harassing you is a dirty, no-good harasser. However, if you lose your cool and do something, say physically attack your harasser, we're going to have to address that separately. Next, make it clear the conduct is unwelcome. You could do it yourself, or as mentioned, you can make a complaint. Let's talk about making a complaint. Even if you've taken the direct approach, we encourage you to make a complaint. Get it on record. How do you make a complaint? There are several ways. First, we have a form for it. There's a link to the form on the home page of ADP. It's also at the back of the employee handbook. You can fill out the form and send it to HR. If you can't find the form, you can call HR or the command center and ask for it. Another approach is just to call HR or email us and tell us the story. Just pick up the phone and call 718-766-5392 and ask for HR, or email us at hr@wisdomprotective.com. Another way is you can tell a manager, and it doesn't have to be your manager. It can be any operations manager or a project manager. You can tell Mosa Paris. You can tell Mr. K. And listen, if you're in a position of management in this company and you hear a complaint, you must notify HR. You cannot sit on it. This is not a secret that you can keep. And if you're making a complaint, understand that we will not sit on it. Finally, if you make a complaint, do not worry about retaliation from the harasser or otherwise. Wisdom Protective policy and applicable law prohibit retaliation for bringing a good faith complaint under our EEO policies. What else can you do? Well, you can always file a charge with the agency responsible for enforcing civil rights in your area. The EEOC for the federal government, the New York State Division of Human Rights, the New York City Commission on Human Rights, the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights. The contact information is here on the screen. Of course, if you've been sexually assaulted, you should call the police, 911. What should you expect if you file an EEO complaint? Well, first, we'll get your story. Usually, this is done by someone in HR. Then, we'll explain the process, which is as follows. We will investigate the allegations by verifying what you've told us. In general, we try to keep the investigation as confidential as possible, limiting our inquiry to those who need to know about it so that we can complete our investigation. If there are witnesses, we will talk to the witnesses. If there are texts or videos, we'll look at those too. We will also speak to the alleged harasser and hear the other side of the story. When the investigation is complete, we will come to a resolution. We may conclude that harassment occurred, did not occur, or that we are unable to tell what happened. If disciplinary action is warranted, we will take that step. If rules need to be clarified, we'll go ahead and clarify them. If the purpose of the complaint is just to put someone on notice that their conduct is unwelcome, we'll make sure that that message gets conveyed. If you're on the receiving end of that notice, be glad someone told you so that you can adjust your behavior. If we determine that the situation crosses the line, we will not hesitate to take action. That action can include removing the harasser from the site or terminating their employment.
Let's talk about Wisdom's anti-retaliation policy. As mentioned, it is against Wisdom policy and the law to retaliate against someone for making a good faith complaint. If you are identified as someone who has engaged in unwelcome conduct, you must take extra care not to retaliate against the person making the allegation. Even if the original complaint is unfounded, retaliating against someone for making the complaint is a separate violation of our policy. If you are the person who has a complaint, note that we will take extra care not to retaliate against you. Do not let fear of retaliation prevent you from improving your situation at work. Look at this headline. Have we just spent all this time going over sexual harassment for nothing? No, because we're going to address the highlighted part, the part about bystanders. Face it, most of us are not the harassers or victims of harassment, but many of us may have seen inappropriate conduct in the workplace. Maybe we did something about it, and maybe we didn't. As it turns out, the willingness to do something, to intervene, creates a culture of intolerance for harassment. And that's the thing that actually prevents harassment from occurring at the workplace. So let's talk about what to do if you're not the target, but you are a witness to conduct that looks to you like sexual or other unlawful harassment. Well, first, if you're the supervisor, you cannot keep it to yourself. Report immediately to HR, no exceptions. For everyone, supervisor or not, you are strongly encouraged to get involved and, yes, intervene. Michelle, why don't people intervene as a matter of course?
Well, Michelle, fear is one big reason. They're afraid of making things worse for the victim or becoming the target themselves.
Absolutely. Depending on the circumstances, this is a risk. However, there are interventions that are less obvious to the harasser, and we'll talk about these in a few minutes.
Well, another reason is people just don't want to get involved.
Bingo. We're all taught to mind our own business. However, this literally is our business, and our willingness to intervene or not affects our workplace culture. The absence of intervention is acceptance of bad behavior in our workplace. If what you are seeing is unacceptable to you, you should make it your business to make sure it doesn't happen on your watch.
Well, some people think it won't matter.
Well, Michelle, studies show the exact opposite. That's why bystander intervention is a mandatory part of training. Harassment is a cultural phenomenon. Intervention and the willingness to intervene creates the culture of what is acceptable and not acceptable. It has a huge impact.
Well, if you're standing in a crowd, you may not want to stand out. If nobody else is doing anything, you don't want to be the one to do it.
Sure, if no one else intervenes, it feels uncomfortable to be the one to do so. Maybe everyone else was thinking about intervening, but someone needs to go first. Go ahead, intervene.
Well, what if you're not sure what you're observing is harassment?
Great question. If you're not sure what you're looking at, it still makes sense to ask the person who may be the victim whether they are okay or if they need you to help them make a report. Supporting victims and letting them know you are a witness is an important form of intervention.
Well, finally, people don't know how to intervene.
I think we should talk more about this.
Okay.
There are different ways to intervene with different levels of engagement and investment required. The intervention methods are often referred to as the 4 or 5 Ds, the words that you see on your screen. Document the last one is not always included. Let's discuss each in turn. Distract. This is about pulling the attention of the harasser from the victim to you or someone else. How do you do this? You can go up to the harasser and victim and ask them the time or for directions. You can physically place yourself between them, spill a drink, or hand them something. If you don't want to get too close, you can pull the attention to you. Exclaim something like, "Can you believe it?" Make a loud noise, or call out the harasser or victim's name. Ask them to come look at something. If you don't feel comfortable being the distraction, another strategy is to get someone else in a position of authority to do the distracting. Delegate the distraction, ideally to someone who seems like they're in charge or under whose watchful eye the harasser would not want to continue the harassment. It could be an administrator, a policeman or policewoman, a person of the same sex, or a person with big muscles, perhaps the barista in a coffee shop you're standing in. When you delegate, you point out what you're observing and ask them to intervene. Of course, as a security officer, you may be called upon to intervene in a potential harassing situation. Let these 5 Ds be your guide. Another way is to take a direct approach. The direct approach involves calling the harasser out in real time. Some examples. "Hey, we don't do that here." "What are you doing?" "Surely you must know a funnier joke," or "That's not cool." If you are not comfortable addressing the situation in the heat of the moment, you can still take a delayed approach. A delayed approach is about validating the victim, telling them you saw what happened and possibly offering to help them through the reporting process. That 5th D, document, is about taking a record of what you observed. Note that even if you're not the victim, you can still complete an EEO complaint form. If you think about it, this least intrusive step is still a pretty important intervention. How do you know which approach is best? It will be a judgment call. If possible, make eye contact with the victim and take your cues from them. Otherwise, take your best shot. Let's review. First, our expectations. Wisdom Protective expects its employees to act professionally and not engage in unlawful harassing, discriminatory, or retaliatory conduct that violates our policies or applicable laws. Next, sex harassment. We have reviewed the definition of sexual harassment, the conduct that constitutes unlawful harassments, and the 2 types of harassments: quid pro quo and hostile work environment. Harassment is a type of discrimination and is prohibited by wisdom policy and applicable law. Next, we discussed other categories. We described that there are equivalent protections for other protected categories under the law and wisdom policy. Then there is reporting. If you experience or witness sexual harassment or any other unlawful harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, there are numerous avenues for making a report. please do so. You do not have to tolerate unlawful harassment, discrimination, or retaliation to work at Wisdom, and you should not tolerate it from your fellow workers. Lastly, intervention. If you are a bystander who becomes aware of a situation involving harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, intervene using those D's as your guide. Distract, delegate, direct approach, delayed approach, and lastly, document. Do not allow harassment to happen on your watch. If you attend any Wisdom annual training program, we will open the floor to questions about this presentation. However, you don't have to wait until then.
If you have a question about this training, our policies, or anything that's going on in your workplace, please reach out to us in HR.
Our email is hr@wisdomprotective.com.
And our phone number is 718-766-5392.
Thank you for your attention.